I get to the idea in lands of entropy, like I guess my stance on this would be that intuition is the strongest representation of consciousness at work and in real time that we have. And it takes nothing's off the table in our brains. Like it's all, we could tap into all of that or as much as we biologically can or physically can. And that's a great thing. That's a awesome prospect or potential to have. But it also gives me a lot of respect for what we have and how precious it is in our heads. And the implications are infinite. And I love that.
Welcome to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner, a show about shifting our individual and collective beliefs on what is possible for the future of humanity. As our understanding of how our reality continues to shift, we are at a point of reunification between science and spirituality. What does the world look like when we break free from the generational trauma that has kept most humans playing small for thousands of years and step into our full power as the co-creators of this reality? I always ask that you keep an open mind with this podcast. Ask yourself what resonates with my truth at this time and what does not. Respect your intuition, but see if you can get through the whole show because there might be that little nugget buried deep in the conversation that unlocks something for you.
Welcome back to Changing the Channel. I have a wonderful guest today, Joseph Lynch. He received his doctorate in education through Kansas State, analyzing the theoretical and practical intersections of intuition and transdisciplinary learning constructs. So that's a mouthful for me. Welcome to the show, Joseph. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, it's great to kind of get back up with you. For those at home listening, Joseph and I went to high school together 20 years ago, and then we went to college together at the University of Delaware. And since we both graduated, I don't think we had a conversation up until maybe 3 months ago when I came across him on LinkedIn and saw what he was doing. And was like, hey, we need to get up. So I definitely appreciate, your willingness to reconnect and come on the show.
Likewise, man. It was very surprising hearing from you. And I don't know. And it's kind of crazy the stuff that we're interested in and not having, spoken to each other very much throughout college, especially.
Yeah.
um, yeah, I don't know. It blows my mind how many, friends, I guess, that we have that overlap, but it just goes to show, you never know who's out there who's kind of like on the same wavelength as you.
Yeah, and I think that's a part of both of our stories too. Is at least I can definitely speak for myself. Um, I've gone through a massive change in my understanding and my my belief systems and all of that over the last 5 or 6 years. And it's very cool to see who comes into your life as you're transitioning and who exits your life as you're transitioning and you're going through these kind of fundamental adjustments in your belief system or your theology or your how you're showing up every single day. So I don't think it's really anything other than two energies kind of finding each other in the chaos of the world for us to kind of connect and have this conversation today.
As I reflect on the past 8 months of recording this podcast, it brings so much joy to have experienced such amazing conversations, to hear the feedback from others and the impact that some of those conversations have had on others. With that being said, I've decided to take the next 3 to 4 months off to really focus on what is present in my life. I'll still be posting some of my favorite episodes, and I'll be sharing little tidbits of information along the way as I feel called. But the regular posting of episodes is going to start to slow down. I am very grateful for everyone and their continued listenership and following my journey. And I just want to say thank you to everyone out there. I will be recording at some point coming up in the fall or winter and putting out more episodes then. But until then, please feel free to reach out to me. Let's have a conversation. Let's get together. I truly enjoy what this sparks in others.
Yeah. Well, like, what was your muse for kind of like this transitioning process for you?
What was my what?
What was your muse, your inspiration for like, is there like a catalyst for this kind of like changing yourself? I'm
Yeah,
not
so
sorry, I know this is your podcast, but
no,
I'm just wondering.
I love it. I had 2 kind of different experiences that shifted what I thought and believed in. The first was a back injury that I experienced, probably 8, 9 years ago, that allowed me to slow down enough to start to take note of what was important in my life. I had just been kinda go, 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 just kind of every day I woke up, I did a whole bunch of stuff, I went to sleep, like, there was no thought process in what I was doing, why I was doing it, and that back injury really allowed me and gave me space to better understand who I wanted to be, and then I had a basically a random Kundalini awakening. So that's the Kundalini is essentially a Vedic or Ayurvedic term for the energy that's stored inside your chakra system. And at some point, if you there's Kundalini yoga, which is a very long way of activating your energetic system and aligning it so that it can essentially move up past your heart and open up your third eye and your crown chakra so that you gain access to the wisdom of the universe. You're able to kind of see into the non-physical world. Um, that just kind of happened to me one weekend. I woke up, I went to bed Friday night, the normal Joe experiencing physical reality from the five senses only. And the next day I woke up and there was an understanding that was profoundly deeper than anything I've ever understood. And that was the impetus for me to go on this journey, which led me to psychedelics, which led me to spiritual practices, which led me down to channeling and being able to kind of access information from other realms, interdimensional realms, access to higher powers, basically. And then from there, just trying to figure out, again, what do I do with this information? Like, where do I go from here now that I've had this awareness of things that are outside the five sense reality? Like, how do I function as a human being again? So
Mhm.
that's been my journey for the last 18 months or so, is just trying to figure out how to function in this new understanding.
Like peeking behind the veil and then like knowing you have to put the veil back, you
Then
know?
you got to put the veil back, and
Yeah.
yeah, you never put it back quite the way that it was before, and you also can't unsee what you've already seen. So it's
Yeah.
that's been my journey. How about you?
Man, insert like I'll just take my name and my identity. I'm just gonna insert into your experiences because they're very, very similar. Like there was like it was something that actually for me it was a TV program I saw on string theory, and I hadn't really messed too much with it. I mean, I was taking a philosophy class and at UD, and so I was, I was reading, and I was also kind of stuck in a limbo because I was about to take a semester off. I was having a bit of like a, I'm not sure if I'm studying what I want to study, if it's getting at what I want to get at, and um, yeah, I saw that, and then I had just this crazy, like, I don't know, transcendent dream, like, and a lot of things were connecting for me through that. I had a very like, uh, it was, I don't even know how to explain it. You probably would have a much better explanation for this than I do, but it was just this physiological response to a way that I was feeling. So many things just started making sense. And it was just a theory, that I was listening to or watching on the program. And there, so before I had the dream, I remember like standing in the kitchen of where I was for, this was on Main Street in Newark, my house there.
Mm.
I was like standing in the kitchen for it felt like hours, but I know it was only like a few minutes, maybe, 15, 20 minutes. And I felt like I was just enveloping the space, and it felt just, I don't know, ethereal, and it felt otherworldly in some ways, spiritual, I guess. Definitely transcendent though.
Yeah.
Um, and that's something that I kind of like got back to during some of my doctoral work a little bit, tapping into that. And I'm also a musician, and I'm an intuitive musician, uh, and I can kind of tap into that sometimes. So I guess it's like I think I learned how to meditate through that process and
Mhm.
or through those experiences, and um, at least when I've described it to people before, that's kind of what they tell me. It sounds like you're meditating. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's
Um,
amazing. So you got out of college, you got into education, and then tell us a bit about what prompted you to get your doctorate in education, studying intuition, and how it intersects with how people essentially learn.
well, I'll start by saying, like, I think kind of just going back to that idea of how much theory um, resonates with me. Different theories, not, I don't necessarily subscribe to like one way of theorizing or thinking about something or studying something. I think that sometimes that can clash with sort of like I would say more clean linear trajectory of society, like where we like things that fit into boxes and are neat, and like we can study things that we want to study, things that we can replicate, and keep building some sort of like foundation of evidence for. And you know, I think that works in particular contexts, and we need things like that, but it doesn't that sterility of that type of stuff like was something that I think just got more amplified in my profession as an educator, um, and I guess really in walks of life where um, there's a body of a priori evidence that suggests that I should be doing something one way when in fact, intuitively I feel differently, for
Right.
better or worse. And making mistakes and the messiness, more often than not, I found some sort of beauty in that, whether it's in the moment or after the moment has occurred and reflecting on it, or somewhere in between. That's something that I've wanted to kind of like sustain and preserve in my profession as an educator. So that's kind of like where I was when I began my studies. I was sort of at this like philosophical crossroads, with like on morality and ethics level, right and wrong and good and bad as it comes to like these children or emergent adults that I'm working with at the secondary level, and what we're tasked with trying to prepare them for, and that did not seem like it was happening as often as it should, and for a lot of different reasons. And I'm not gonna, um, I don't know if we have enough time for me to go on a bunch of tangents about that. Read the dissertation, I guess, if you want some of those details. But like, it's more of like, I think that even if people have good intentions, they might have a hard time figuring out how to trust themselves along the process
Right.
of making a decision and navigating things like data, and navigating that sterility, while also leaving room for openness and mindfulness and messiness. So as I was going into the program, I kind of kept that in mind, like, and took like a breath and just said, "This is what I want to get out of this," and it's not necessarily to create something that is groundbreaking or is, discovering something that hasn't been discovered before or anything like that. I don't, I, I just did. I felt like that was a tall order for one, for me to put on myself, because what happens if I don't reach that, and I kind of know inevitably, like, and especially like talking with you and knowing how parallel like we are in terms of like how we think about the world and our outlook. I I think it even more like solidifies that notion that, like, all of us are on some level thinking about very similar things, and there is an interconnectedness that is worth exploring amongst individuals.
Mhm.
So I kind of like felt like on one level it's like a journey of like exploration of what's out there, and what isn't being done, how we can alternatively look at things that are and create space for those things to exist and to be explored, without fear of, you know, um, issues of, is it valid enough, or is it sound enough? Is it backed by statistical research enough? And then also, saying that we need those things just as much as we need the other thing, and we need a balance of those things, or at least input from both. And it became a self exploration journey, I think, fundamentally, where I was my narrating my exploration along the way, and it kind of like just morphed into this, this creature, I guess, this beast um, of a work of study that's called autoethnography. So like that's like bringing yourself into the study, and it was a fun process. That's one thing that I can say from it. Most people who go through doctoral studies, uh, that I've talked to, don't really enjoy it. They just want it to be over. I feel like I'm continuing to do the work, even though that part of my, that chapter is over. I'm still engaged in the process and the work. I'm still, studying and writing and researching, um, because for from all that I'm seeing, that space still isn't there where it needs to be.
Right.
So, and I might have been rambling a bit, on that, but I think that I had to be okay with a few things. I had to make a few concessions before I started that, my doctoral work, or my dissertation work, I guess. One of those being, how would it be received, and what's it trying to contribute? And the big thing was that if I go into this trying to equate it to how much society values, like quantitative data and statistical modeling and things like that, that might be a battle that, uh, I could potentially lose. And I didn't also think that that was the right perspective to take in it. I'm not trying to create the antithesis to that stuff. I'm trying to create something that exists in tandem with it.
Right. I think you used the word balance correctly. I mean, this is what seems like society is starting to learn, that to go down the strictly physical, materialistic perspective has its limits. You get to a certain point and then you just can't go any further with that worldview. But we don't need to go back to a completely spiritual perspective as well. We can't completely get rid of the fact that we're physical beings in a physical plane where there are rules and laws that seem to be bound in the physical world. And to just kind of throw those out and just allow yourself to kind of play in that space of no physicality whatsoever. We're just spiritual beings, and this physical realm means absolutely nothing. It's just kind of a playground for people. I think that's kind of the wrong. It's not telling the whole story. I think that story lies in between those two perspectives of, yes, we're physical beings. There's laws. There's physical universe that we have to kind of understand, and we're also spiritual beings that have access to way, way more information than the 5 sense human reality allows us to think that we have access to. And I think, and I'm hopeful that this is where society is starting to move towards, is that we're kind of renouncing the physicality for physicality's sake and we're starting to move back into understanding a little bit of spirituality, a little bit of the essence that kind of unites all of us together. A lot of people, most scientists call it consciousness. Um, but that's kind of where we're moving towards. And as that transition happens, this is the transition from epochs, from the Piscean era into the Aquarian era. The Aquarian era is an era of knowledge and wisdom. It's the era of us understanding more than we did in the Piscean era, which is basically coming to an end. And our generation, and the generation that comes after us, and the generation that came before us, are the lucky souls that get to experience this transition, to live and be born in that world where it is just physical, and then to experience your spiritual awakening, to experience the your sixth sense, your ability to tap into intuition, and to be alive at that time. A lot of souls, there's tons of souls in the universe that would want to be and have this experience
Yeah,
right
I mean,
now.
that's the thing about consciousness is that it's this squirrely little thing that, no one can really pinpoint what it is. I mean, we have more theory on it than we have, true sounds, um, representational data on what it is. And that's kind of what I get into in my work is like that was, I guess full disclosure, like that's kind of like what I was thinking about when I was going into the program too. Because I was like trying to think about how I could push the boundaries of curriculum and instruction, research and study, because that's what I was studying. Um, and I kept thinking about what's not being represented in what I'm teaching on a daily basis. And so I was like, I need to conceptualize consciousness in a way that can transfer into some quantitative data. And that's kind of where I was at. And then, the more I started to prep and stuff and for my research and study, I was like, that's not where I'm at. Because, you know, there's already a lot of work going into that process. And I like the idea more of us not knowing truly what it is,
Hmm.
rather than having some sort of categorical definition. Because then I think that once we start getting in that road and we start, having a sound, um, and generally accepted categorization of what it is and what it entails, we start to fall into, I guess, some of the ways that we currently operate on a lot of things that have created other problems. I just think the implications are too, negative, in some ways for us to. It's okay to have something there that you can't explain fully.
Right.
That makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and I like I like being in that space of discomfort. I like grappling with that, and I'm good with not necessarily reaching a conclusion. And that's kind of like what I went into this work with. Like, I'm not sure what my conclusion will be, when I was writing the dissertation, but I knew it. I knew I had at least a last page. I felt it. And I can't explain what that feeling was, like, and I just knew it. And I had a complete, like, now I'm getting chills right now, like thinking about it, like that moment, because it was just so impactful for me.
Mm.
All of that effort kind of getting to that point. And so I get, as you know about like Friesian, right? Like the chills, the bumps you get, like when something resonates with you.
Right.
It's a really strong, like, physiological beacon for me. It guides a lot of decisions that I make, things that I explore, how I decide to kind of use my time and, conscious effort. And, I explore that throughout the process too. And I narrate through that and I talk through it. And I show in a qualitative context, some data that, what was developed in my personal life that transfers into, my professional life and then my philosophical stances. And um, there was a lot of like permeation that I was kind of, I think, discovering in terms of like how I was navigating a lot of different constructs and areas. But one of the things that I mentioned in there, just to get back to the consciousness thing real quick, is that when we start to try to pinpoint what it is exactly, we get things like neural imaging and, pictures of, brains and where places light up and things like that. I like neuroplasticity and what science has talked about with that and where we're going with it. I think that that's something that is gaining a lot more um, a priori foundation over time, and I think it's great. I think it's a piece to the puzzle, and there's also just I kind of describe it as like just this ethereal aspect that we got to be okay with existing, like we have to be okay with it existing in places, and not necessarily everything is going to have a clean cut explanation.
Right.
But where I don't know where that transfers into like education, though. I think the big thing that I was seeing is like I would get these physiological responses, these chills, like hair, raising in the back of my neck and all that in moments when I was teaching in the classroom. And those moments were when I was intuitively navigating content with students. We were, I was facilitating it and we were kind of teaching it we were teaching each other.
Mm.
And it was this whole, just, I don't know, this collaborative symbiotic process, just like we were all together involved in and engaged in it. That's when that stuff, and that would be sustained for hours, you know, throughout a given day. And those are the moments that resonate with me most. But the more I would look at something that was, you know, standardized or replicated in nature, replicative in, goals or in its essence, like I realized that I was getting less of those feelings, less of those responses, not having the space to intuitively navigate the content. I mean, social research is very much like an intuitive thing. And the cleaner, the more we kind of like just
Sterilize.
right sterilize it and depend on numbers to like tell us how to navigate life, the more likely we are to lose that sense. So that's something that I worry about. And that goes back to when I've talked to people like family members just saying, when I talk about that, when I was mentioning Frisian to them, they'd be like, I haven't felt that in years. Like, and I'm like, but you can still, you could again.
Right.
But you've lost the ability to get there, you lose track sense of it because other things get in the way.
Yeah. And that's again, yeah, there's a theory that um the best outcome for your life is by following the your highest calling, and the way to find your highest calling is through trusting your intuition. And how your intuition speaks to you is different for everybody. Some people, it might be that physiological response. For me, there's a feeling in my heart. It's like this overwhelming, warm, almost like just completely engulfing feeling of like my heart lighting up. And that is the physiological response for me that guides me through my intuition. That's how my soul or guides speak to me. Apart from also in meditation, able to kind of channel information through those meditations. And I'd be interested to hear from you. Like, did it ever feel like you were more or less channeling information during those education when you were teaching those kids and having that physiological response? Did it ever feel like something was speaking through you and not necessarily you were the one that was speaking the whatever you were teaching about?
As if I was like a conduit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
It happened it happens, it does now. It's, I would say post-COVID, it happens less, which scares me, and which I'm conscious of on a daily basis. But it happens a lot more when I'm not the one driving the conversation,
Mhm.
when I'm listening, and when I'm seeing just, you know, this ignition of knowledge, exploration going on. And it's not me anymore. It's like, I don't know, kind of might piss off some music people here, but like, I think sometimes like when you see an orchestra, it's such a well-oiled machine that the conductor isn't really doing anything. Like they're just kind of, there
Right,
because like, it's sort of like memorized at that point, the system, and it's mechanistic, and and it's still beautiful, and it still has beauty in it, for the conductor I feel like it might be intuitive, and I'm not a conductor, so maybe I'm just talking out of my ass here, but um I just felt like the machine was kind of like working, um and I was just sort of maintenance, I guess. you know I don't know if that
right.
makes any sense, but
No,
um
that makes total sense. That's, kind of the idea of allowing the ego to step aside and the soul to kind of take over.
yeah,
In the Buddhist tradition, that's typically what enlightenment is when the soul or the Godhead, when Brahman takes over, um, and becomes in control of Atman, and that is like essentially what enlightenment is. It's when the little I, um, gets in the back seat, and the capital I, the I that is you forever through the totality of time and space, kind of gets into the driver's seat and takes over for a little bit.
man, when I before I started, so like my dissertation is titled Lands of Entropy. That's the first part of it. And I guess the subtitle is, A Dissenting Alarmist's Chaotic Navigation of Intuition, Learning, and Transcendence, but we'll just call it Lands of Entropy for short. Um, when Before I got to that point, when I started writing that, I got a study published earlier in my doctoral studies it's a qualitative study on um, just a theory that I was kind of like playing with and thinking about, and wanting to try to figure out how to code that for research purposes. And it was on these processes of communication, um, and I use logical modeling, so like uh, inductive processes, and then I categorize their other areas as like deductive, and basically just like it's just a matter, and it's like a linear way of thinking about it. But like what I was thinking about in those moments when kind of everybody's all hands on deck, everybody's helping each other in that setting, and everybody's helping each other learn and contributing, and nothing's kind of like off the table. And these are the moments that are the greatest, like when you have students like coming over and helping other students. You didn't even have to facilitate that, it's just happening, and they're all just like, oh man, like I didn't even realize that. And then they go here, and I thought of it as like a synchronous process, like all of these logical processes are on at the same time.
Mhm.
um and that was, I think, pretty illuminating for me, to kind of think of it that way. Is it encapsulate that process fully? No, not necessarily. But for me, it was definitely something that helped me understand like where I needed to go, and what I needed to try and do. So, but yeah, like that's time started to kind of shift for me in terms of like how I saw it, and what it could be, and then it just sort of had this cascading effect on, how I think, and what it is that I'm actually like looking at here. And it isn't, I mean, that's intuition. And so like I get to the idea in Lands of Entropy, like, I guess my stance on this would be that like intuition is is sort of like the strongest representation of consciousness at work and, in real time, that we have. And it takes nothing's off the table in our brains. Like, it's all, we could tap into all of that, or as much, I guess, as much as we biologically can or physically can.
Right.
And that's a great thing. That's a awesome prospect or potential to have. But it also gives me a lot of respect for what we have and how precious it is, in our heads, and the implications are infinite, and I love that. Um, and I want that to show up more in settings where we're trying to help other people navigate life and learn, and understanding and developing their sense of self confidence, their sense of agency in that process. I think is I think that just as much as we're like open to things now and where we're going, and as you said earlier, I also think that there's a lot to be considered in terms of like how we're accessing those things and how much maybe we're leaving on the table with ourselves or we're not considering in terms of potential,
Mhm.
and it kind of that energizes me to keep going, I guess. I want to, I don't know, do whatever I can to help people understand it, that there's, this beautiful thing inside them, which is their brain and their soul, their consciousness, all of that. But them having the opportunity to see that, it's so easy because it's there every day, but we've lost faith in ourselves a little bit, I think, along the way.
Yeah, do you draw on your childhood and your childhood education as part of like why you did it? Because, again, everybody's education was different, but
Mm,
growing up in Sussex County, Delaware, there was no discussion of any of this. What is consciousness? Like, why are we here?
mhm,
And obviously, with separation of church and state, that's kind of mandated within the country as far as traditionally any idea of spirituality, of the soul, of the um, eternal essence of who you are was typically left up to some type of religious structure. That's typically where it was. But how powerful would it be if we did away with the religious aspect of spirituality? The fact that there is something that we don't know, we don't fully understand. There's a consciousness inside each one of us that is trying to be drawn out, that wants to be shared amongst the rest of the population. If we started teaching kids at 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 12 years old that, there's something inside of them that's trying to be let out and
mhm.
how powerful that would be. So have you gotten to a place where that's like an outcome where that can be something that we are teaching, or is that just kind of a part of the process that you're going through right now?
I think that we'll see where it goes. I mean, you know, on one hand, I want things to change how I changed. You know, by the time I was done writing Lands of Entropy and I was like in this headspace that I really appreciated, and I'm grateful that I got to it, you immediately want everyone to, you know, get to that stage and figure out what that means for them. And um, having engaging discourse on topics, listening to people and, exploring things, not being afraid to mess up, not feeling pressure to um conform to a data driven objective. Those things, I don't think that like those things are needed, but I don't think that they're, you know, needed above feeling confident in your ability to do things, and hear information and perspectives that, run parallel to that and in some ways counter that at some point. I mean, I think that makes good discourse. And
Mhm.
when you're open to that. And like there's a lot of things at play, and I feel like I've been rambling a bit as I've been talking to you about this, just because there's so much that went into my own process, and I'm only speaking for myself here. Like, I think that um, that's why my research is categorically considered art research, or arts based. I mean,
Hmm.
um, because of its lack of replicability, and that was a concession I had to make, um, and be okay with it being categorized a certain way. That and the academic community might not be considered to stand as, in terms of like validity as much as like, something that is, you know, really backed by numbers and data. I
Right.
think though that the process that I narrate I think all of that can. So there's like, um, so I guess getting back to something that you were mentioning about or asking about, like with my childhood and my past, going into this. Um, yeah, I mean, so there's the adverse childhood experiences scale, and the higher you are on that scale, the more statistically likely it you are, or it's predicted that your life expectancy goes down, like the potential for you to grapple with things like substance abuse, um, you know, criminal the implications for like, criminality and law issues with the law. And, there's all of these things that come with that and its implications. Nothing's set in stone, obviously.
Right.
So I have definitely had struggles as a child. And I don't know. I don't know how to get to places. I haven't really talked about it in like a podcast. I mean, this is the first podcast I've been on, so
I mean, yeah,
stuff we can
share
talk
share
about.
whatever you feel comfortable. You don't have to get into the depths
No,
of it, but
yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to get there. It's just like I grew up in a very negative, traumatic environment. It was, I'd say, if the likelihood of me getting to where I am now was slim, and didn't really feel like it was, I had any prospects. And I had experiences where some people would like believe in me as I was growing up or going through grade school, and I didn't know how to see that or perceive it.
Mm.
And I didn't know how to. I guess that's maybe why I, in like a comfort way, became a bit of an introvert. Is because I had such a hard time understanding how people were seeing me, and I was more, I guess, hyper focused on trying to be something that I thought people wanted me to be in a moment, or acting a certain way, or something like that. I wasn't confident in myself. I think in some ways it still lacked confidence or self confidence in certain settings, but um, I guess the difference now is that I'm able to say this is what I've done and this is what I'm doing, and this is where I am on a daily basis, just kind of taking stock of that and being okay with what I am and what I am not, because I think I'm a bit of all of it anyway. I don't know
Right.
how to explain it, but yeah, working through trauma is tough, and working through things like poverty, and seeing a lot of things that are trying to push you. They're not trying to push you. Those exist, and you can, fall subject to those things. And I guess I'm just going to be grappling with all of that for the rest of my life, like everybody else does. I mean, um, there's just another way of looking at what that did for me. It gave me a lot of things, like just grit and tenacity, and all the, all the stuff that you would see on a coach's motivational poster in their office.
right.
But I do have those things. I mean, when I was writing my dissertation, I was also remodeling my kitchen. Um, I mean, full remodel. Like, I was building cabinetry and doing a lot of things that I never had done before. but I wanted to do those, and I did that. I was also writing and recording music, and I was also raising children and, being a husband and all of that stuff. So I was able to um, navigate all of these different things like in tandem. And, you know, that's a strength and trait that I have leaned into more over time. When in the past, I didn't have the self confidence to say, like, yeah, I think I can do that, or I think I should try that.
Mhm.
And uh, I would always be kind of like on the other end of that saying like you're not able to do it. You're not capable of it. You're stupid. I let those things talk to me. And I guess maybe that's a aspect of or byproduct of childhood traumas, stuff like that. Um the negative is easier to go into, you know, but or the negative is easier to listen to than maybe the other side of that. Like you are capable. You know, you do have potential, and what are you gonna do with it though?
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's a big part of like the therapy journey. And it's really cool that therapy in the last 20 years has gone from this kind of like fringe, only if you really have issues, you go to therapy to, a lot of people, you know, they're doing therapy because they want to do therapy. They're like, it's not, they don't think that they're broken. They just understand that there's a value to getting a second perspective of who you are and what you're being at that very moment. And, therapy, coaching, mentorship, all of those things go into getting that perspective where, again, we're all trapped in our own mind. We're all only able to view reality from inside of our own brain. And to get a perspective from outside your own brain changes the way that your brain is structured. It creates the neuroplasticity to get you to the belief that you can do what you want. And then as your um, external reality reinforces your internal reality, your brain continues to change and shift, and go from being wired to see the negative in everything to being wired to see the positive in everything. And again, we just kind of we walk on this fine line between those two worlds. And there's some beliefs that say you should be in that middle, kind of the middle way. The Taoist perspective is that positivity and negativity, they're just uh, two sides of the same coin. But if you can stay in the middle and stay balanced between those two, you can actually see everything for what it is. And that is kind of a very powerful perspective that has helped me not necessarily buy into, okay, I want to be on the positive, always positive, 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 or the negative, 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 because sometimes that egoic mind, even though it might think that it's a positive, actually, if you were listening to your intuition, if you really tuned into what your heart wanted, you would realize that's not exactly what you were looking for. It's just a shiny object that looked like something that you really wanted to move towards. And for me, that's been um, kind of a life lesson that I've experienced here. Um, but yeah, it's very fascinating to kind of hear your story as a child and what to reframe it as these were all the negative things that happened to me. And now it is, these are what have allowed me to become who I am today. And to reframe that is huge.
that's the point. I mean, I think that, and that's why I think that my work ended up being autoethnographic and narrative on the way. I don't think it could have been any other way. I don't really subscribe to like an objectivist approach at discussing subjects and participants and data and study, especially like when you're doing things like social research. It just feels anti-personal. It's not the that's not what we're doing. You know what I mean? When you're talking about humans and human interactions and how um your inputs and your outputs and all that, like those get a lot more messy. And again, I love like grappling with that stuff. Like and again, like you won't know where that's going to take you. it's likely it's going to take you into other contexts and other disciplines of study and research. And that was really the driving force for me, was like, I wanted to simulate that process, what it looks like for a researcher, because of that, we have a tendency to work in a paradigmatic fashion, where we're like, we like things because we like that cleanliness, the categorization of things, like the ability to like say, all right, this is where this goes, this is where this goes, and this is where this goes, and let's put all that together. Like fighting that, I think is a big part of intuition. Like, is I can these things aren't necessarily always going to be in this place, and I'm good with that. I always tell my students, like, you walk, kind of going back to that thing you were talking about earlier about like, that the physical and the non-material like dynamic, like you walk from a classroom to a classroom in a school setting, like it doesn't mean that you have to compartmentalize that information necessarily, or what you learn in one setting as opposed to another. Like that, there's some transferability that comes with that process because your consciousness is kind of permeating all of that. And like that's the kind of like teaching and learning, that I feel like I want to see, in the evolution of education, is opportunities like that where the kind of the gloves are off and we're kind of like just in there and we're just, you know, taking in anything and willing to just get our hands dirty and be okay with what the outcome might be. And it's not, and you can do that along with having things like, uh, data driven results too. I think there's a way to have both exist in the same setting. I think they're both necessary. So yeah, I don't know. I, that was that's the connection though. That's for me, like the past, and what that's always going to be there. It's like this recursive element in my life. Uh, and I don't, I wanted to kind of like ignore those things when I'd be in social settings, or thinking about where I want to go with my life, and be sort of like this antithetical narrative where now I'm more of like a holistic narrative, and that's happening. All of these things kind of show up in this process, and I grapple with those things in the same setting, and something new will be created from that. So like in that same way, I simulate what it's like for a researcher to go through all these different siloed disciplines of study, and finding those connections, and finding the issues and how we describe and narrate those things, the results, the conclusions, the implications. And there are patterns that you find, there are connections. And that subjectivity shows up in that. Again, that's why this is kind of categorically like arts based. But the I think the connections are salient and they're important. And I do think it's where we're going as thinkers, and we're getting more open to the idea that like we shouldn't just be thinking about one thing in one context and one environment. Like there's transferability, and we need to be open to that. That's kind of where the entropy concept comes from too. Like there's these channels that we kind of ignore the more we hyper focus on what we can and can't do, in a
Right.
replicative way.
Yeah, I mean, that's science in a nutshell for the last 300 years. Again, science came out of more or less the Christian church in the 13, 14, 1500s. That going back to the Arabic world, it came out of Islamic study, was the study of all of these scientific endeavors, going back to the Greeks, going back to the Romans. They didn't come out because we wanted to figure out how the world worked. They came out because we wanted to figure out what the heck was God. Like, what is God? And then 300 years ago, we decided, oh, well, we're going to do away with anything that we can't see, taste, touch, feel, or smell, and we're going to focus on that. And our spiritual ability, our ability to sense other worldly aspects, entropied. It completely disappeared from not completely, but from a broad perspective, it very much entropied to a very tiny perspective. Very few people actually truly believed in anything outside of their physical reality. Religion became kind of a doctrinated aspect of our, um, it was just another appointment on our weekly thing to do.
Mm.
And that took away from this spiritual understanding of what it was. And then we're going through this more or less collapse of society. Not that society has collapsed entirely, but the functionality of what society was supposed to be doing has been tested for sure. We've had catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe, because of the lack of understanding of our interconnectedness and just the basis of, there's only the physical world. We don't have to worry about anything else besides that. And now we're coming back towards that pendulum, swinging back towards this,
Yeah.
like you and I are viewing the world in this way that, yeah, there is something more than just, when kids come into a classroom and we speak at them for 45 minutes and then they learn, it goes into their brain, they form these pathways. And that's the only thing that's happening in this school system. There's
Mm.
there's an interplay between these children that are happening on a subconscious, unconscious level that we should at least be addressing, or at least acknowledging that there's something else going on, and allowing ourselves to kind of play with that, which it sounds like that's kind of what you have been doing over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, part of this was like this whole thing that I think was amplifying the problem for me more, and the motivation to kind of explore this stuff was those moments when I was willing to like take sort of an intuitive instructional process and like kind of let things unravel and see where they go. Um, I was still getting test results and um, you know performance data that reflected objectives being met and complex rigorous instruction happening in that setting. And
Mm.
that's part of the, you know, faith that I have in a different or alternative approach, having at least equal amount of, applicability is something that's, you know, um, rooted in numbers, and that's again, like that my goal is just to show that that alternative aspect can work in tandem with, the commonly accepted way. And we can kind of interweave the two. We don't need to abandon the way because again, it's that pendulum swing, it's that paradigmatic fashion that we kind of like think. I think that we get driven towards one way and we move another way. And
Mhm.
it's very linear, and how we kind of navigate things and there's there's some nonlinearity there that we can listen to a bit more. And that's the stuff that I like thinking about is what that looks like in everyday life. I'd say, I mean, I need a job, so like, I need to go into a classroom. Like learning does not have to just exist in a school, or in an educational setting. Like it happens all the time, everywhere. And the more someone is open to that process and engages with it actively, the more likely they're gonna realize that they can tackle anything in front of them because of that interconnectedness, that interplay, the recursivity, like all of those things show up, and that's kind of like what I became open to. Like somebody mentioned to me when I was in this stuff, like they were saying, like I was kind of engaged in dissertation work as therapy. Kind
Mm.
of going back what you said about therapy earlier. Like I do buy into that a little bit, at least like because of how it made me feel and my outlook and what I was able to, I guess, develop over the course of like a year of being engaged with that work. And it was pretty much just by myself doing it, but like I was just that active engagement of the process. Nothing was off the table in terms of like knowledge and what I could access or what I wanted to access or what I wanted to include. And all of it shows up in there, and I'm narrating all of that stuff. And I guess I don't really get to, anything conclusive by the end, except for the fact that I feel more grounded in my sense of um, agency as an educator, and feeling more grounded in me having something to contribute. So gaining confidence in that, being open to being wrong, being open to a process that doesn't turn out the way I might have hoped it would. Um, because I and one aspect, from page 1, by the end of the last volume of my work, like, I didn't achieve what I set out to do necessarily, but I found that I had figured out something more fundamental, which was kind of like faith and trust and a process, and the process itself, like, um, I created a ton of products along the way, that still resonate with me and I'm still kind of playing with and working with, and that's the point, that's the point of it. I don't think we can truly ever know something conclusive. Um, Science really wants us to, and it's not possible, you know?
It's a preconceived notion of science that is built on absolutely nothing concrete. The idea that science is going to prove something, and again, just going back to consciousness, the hard problem of consciousness literally flies in the face of the idea that the concretized scientific method is the only way to do something. Because
Mhm.
okay, prove consciousness then. Tell me what consciousness is and tell me what consciousness isn't, and tell me what beings are conscious and what beings are not conscious. I mean, we're down to the idea of microbiological quantum mechanics. So we're understanding that at the subatomic and atomic levels, there's a interconnection, there's a communication that's happening at those levels that we didn't previously understand. We had no idea because we don't have the tools to measure that. And that's kind of a part of this problem, is that um, we have a certain level of tool to measure things in the scientific realm, and anything that exists outside of our measurability is deemed not real, right? And I
Mhm.
don't it's like, if you had a thermometer that only went down to 0 degrees, you would believe that nothing could get colder than 0 degrees and saying that's the truth. And it's like, no, that's just the tool that you're measuring that temperature. That we know that Kelvin, you can get down to negative 322 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's just as real as 0 degrees Fahrenheit. So, yeah, just to kind of see how kind of ludicrous it is to have these so much faith built into a system that is built on how can we measure things and not built on how do we understand things? How do we feel about those things? What does our intuition tell us about the things that we're doing?
Yeah,
Um,
I think we can hone that. That's the big thing, part of this too. Like, science doesn't like intuition because of its messiness and because of how measurability becomes such an obstacle for it. And
Mhm.
um the so should that mean that intuition doesn't have a place in it? Because, I kind of operate in a sense like I think that objectivism, or having something that's truly objectively developed is impossible, especially if humans are involved in it. Even if something is artificially created, um, if there's a human who had involvement in that at any stage, objective its objectivity is compromised. And that's the thing, is like, when you kind of look at it, if you at least sit there for a little while and think through that line of path. So then what does that mean for everything that we do create, and understanding that there is going to be an element of subjectivity in there, and that there's not truly going to be something that's measured that is as it is, and that's it. Move on. That's how it is. Because if that's the case, then we wouldn't have so many examples of things that have been upended, and things that we thought we knew that we don't know. And that's the beauty of learning, right? And the beauty of kind of keep this process of questioning and inquiry along that way. How we represent that is, you know, another major branch of, my interests in terms of research is like what that looks like in a representational sense. For me, it's a lot of times it's words, and the interplay of words and how I use them. And that kind of transfers into how I wrote the dissertation is, because it's like a multi-genre narrative process. And in that part, I was able to in that sense, I was able to kind of show in a representational way how ideas and connections can permeate each other and kind of create something that is so, I guess, offbeat from what we're used to.
Mhm.
And that was the most, I guess, enlightening parts for me was when I was creating those products, and seeing what happened from them. A good example I would say of it, or at least one of my favorites is, when I talk about the concept of aphasia, um, you know, um, brain suffering traumatic injury, and um, I was exploring that and reading on it while I was also reflecting on experience my father had, with traumatic brain injury, and it morphed into me creating this mythological goddess named Aphasia, and um, sort of like presenting her as this um, being or entity that is sort of like imprisoned by people's inability to um, categorize her, essentially,
Mm.
and in a superficial way, um, which transferred into an essential way of understanding her. And she was there, but she was sort of like this ethereal construct that people couldn't pinpoint. Um, and then so like then that narrative kind of morphed into me exploring my father's experiences, and then me also kind of conceding that like scientific research is necessary in particular settings. Like when you're talking about traumatic injuries to something as precious as the brain, of course, like you need data and you need numbers, you need measurability, when you're talking about how to treat and, um, help people heal and things like that. But again, it's not the only thing because there's also research involved in the therapy and treatment of patients, that suggests that you need things like human interaction and communication that's complex and effective and kind of moving incrementally in certain places and also trying to regain that neuroplastic foundation, I guess. So all of it's needed and all of it can work together. So anyway, that's that's a that's where I'm at with a lot of that stuff. I think I'm also just looking forward to seeing where I go with it.
Yeah, that makes two of us because I am very excited to now be on this journey with you and see where it takes you and where you head next with this, kind of understanding that you're coming into, both kind of brushing up against traditional education and what what is happening in the education system as we shift away from, the system that has been built for the last couple of years, and just your personal journey just to see kind of where that ends up as well, because it's, again, when you go on journey of consciousness of trying to understand what your consciousness is and why you're here and what all this experience is meant to do. It it's beautiful and it's scary and it's exciting, and you can get lost for days or months or weeks or years even, kind of in that exploratory phase. So for you to
What is
have gone into, your PhD and being able to experience that, I mean, that's amazing from my perspective.
appreciate you saying that. What is your take on faith then? Or what is your how does faith like find its way into your own life work and process?
I mean, again, faith is belief in something that you can't see, right? It's the idea that there is, for me, that there's something out there that my human brain can't necessarily understand, but there is an ability to tap into that on a more fundamental level than just the human experience, to be able to tap into what people call God or the universe or their higher self, however you conceptualize this stream of consciousness that is flowing through you on your daily basis that the human brain just doesn't comprehend. So faith to me is just faith that there is something greater than me that is directing me, that is showing me the way if I choose to listen to it. So you have to have faith in your intuition. You have to have faith in that guiding voice that is helping you through your life. You have to have faith in whatever that higher power is for you. And I try not to use terms that are typically wrapped in religious experiences, because there's that
Uh,
intonation of what religion has become and the experience that people have had with religion. So I like to use, the term higher self. Again, just it's just a level above you that you can't quite comprehend, but it's just as much you as what you call yourself. So I have faith that there is something that is guiding me, that is showing me a pathway in this life. And for me, that is what faith is, from my perspective.
mhm. I feel like we're about to start cooking with grease here, man. And like we've already been talking for a while. I don't know
I
what
know
you're,
we if
you're, you're
we had more time, I would love to get into that. But I know we'll do another conversation here. So we'll save that for episode 2 of the Joe's podcast, when we get that going. But yeah, I do want to, really appreciate you coming on and just being open and vulnerable and willing to have this conversation. It's beautiful that we've been able to make this happen. And we will definitely do this again, probably in the next couple of months. So this was a really cool conversation. And just in case anybody is looking to find you, what's the best way to get a hold of you, whether it's socials or a website, or if anybody wants to get a link to your dissertation, how do they find that?
um so you can search it through Kansas State University KREX. You can probably just Google it, lands of entropy and my name, and you'll find it that way. And probably LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'm not really active on social media that much. So LinkedIn would probably be the best way to contact me if you had any interest in it. And if you have interest in qualitative research, autoethnography, in relation to things like transdisciplinary study, or just want to engage in some philosophical discourse, like I'm interested in that too. So, but yeah, That would probably be the best way.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure I share those links on the show notes. So if anybody's looking for those, just click down below. Otherwise, great catching up with you, Joseph. Always happy to have you back on the show. And yeah, let's definitely stay in touch.
Yeah, man. I'm open to having coming on again. So let me know.
Thank you again for listening to Changing the Channel with Joe Garner. If you enjoyed the show, please follow the podcast, hit the bell to know when a new show comes out, share with a friend, and rate us on whatever platform you're tuning in from. It helps get these messages out to more people to create the collective shift in reality we are here to experience. Make sure you interact with the Q&A and poll sections of the show so I can continue to provide content you enjoy. Finally, check out my website in the show notes to become a VIP of Changing the Channel and